What if the greatest love story wasn't about perfection, but about two people brave enough to defy the world for each other? In a world ruled by power and appearances, would you dare to choose love even when it costs everything? Because sometimes the risk is the legacy. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Grayson Hale wasn't a man who flinched easily. At 32, he had survived billion-dollar negotiations, media scandals, and 2 near-death helicopter landings over the Pacific. But nothing, absolutely nothing, made his stomach twist like breakfast with his mother. Not because of the Eggs Benedict, which the chef always nailed, but because Celeste Hale was the kind of woman who didn't just serve power, she plated it, garnished it with precision, and expected you to swallow it whole. Have you ever had to sit across from someone who could ruin your entire life with one polite smile? The dining room at Hale Manor was the kind of place that made even billionaires feel underdressed. Marble floors, chandeliers that looked like frozen fire, a table long enough to seat 24, though only 2 people ever sat there. At precisely 800 a.m., Celeste entered clad in ivory silk and ambition. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She didn't have to. Grayson looked up from his barely touched black coffee and braced himself. "Good morning," she said with a voice that was always 2 degrees colder than necessary. "We have a wedding to discuss." He blinked once, slowly. "You mean my wedding?" Celeste offered a tight smile as she took her seat, folded a linen napkin in her lap like she was leading a hostile takeover. "Of course, Harper Langford is available. Her family's ready to move forward. They've approved the engagement timeline. If you agree, the announcement will be released by Thursday. You'll be married by Christmas." Grayson leaned back, the chair creaking under the weight of both disbelief and dread. "Mom," he said carefully, "I haven't proposed. I haven't even agreed to." "That's the least important part," she interrupted smoothly. "What matters is that Hale & Company secures the Langford partnership. They're injecting $70 million. Do you understand how rare that level of capital is in a post-recession market?" Grayson narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand how rare choice is in my life?" Celeste didn't blink. "You're not a teenager with a guitar and a dream. You're a CEO, and CEOs make sacrifices for vision for survival. You want to take the company global, then marry Harper." It hit him then, the exact way she said it. Then marry Harper. Not date her, not get to know her, but marry. Like she was offering him a seatbelt before pushing him off a cliff. Do you think it's ever okay to turn love into a contract? To let someone else's family expectations, business dictate who you wake up next to for the rest of your life? Because in that moment, Grayson felt like a pawn wearing a Brioni suit, and it made his chest tighten like he'd swallowed glass. "And if I don't?" he asked, the edge in his voice razor sharp. Celeste dabbed at her lips with her napkin, then set it down like a gavel. "Then you'll watch Hale & Company bleed investors until it collapses. I'll pull every personal asset I've leveraged into this company, and you'll be remembered not as a visionary, but as the man who lost everything because he refused to act like a Hale." Her words were calm, controlled, like poison slipped into champagne. "You think this is your company, Grayson? It's not. It's ours, and I won't let you destroy it." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Grayson stared at the coffee, now cold and bitter like this morning, like this family, like the damn deal. Then he stood, slowly, pushed his chair back. The scrape echoed in the marble room like thunder. "Then I guess we're done here," he said. "I have work to do." Celeste didn't move. "Think about it," she called after him. "By Thursday, that's your deadline." But he was already walking down the corridor, each step louder than the last, as if he could drown out the scream building inside him. That night, he stood on the penthouse balcony of his downtown condo, overlooking the glittering lights of Chicago. 62 floors above the noise, but none of it felt far enough from what waited for him back home. He scrolled through his phone. Message from Harper: dinner on Thursday. My stylist wants to measure you for the engagement photos. He didn't reply. Instead, he stared into the skyline and whispered to the wind, "Is this what it's all for? Would you say yes to a marriage that guaranteed your success but cost you your soul?" As midnight approached, Grayson wandered the hallways of Hale Manor, again seeking silence but finding ghosts of legacy, of pressure, of everything he never got to choose. Portraits of past Hales lined the walls, their eyes painted in ambition and disappointment. He paused under one. Elias Hale, founder of the dynasty. The plaque read, "Fortune favors the strategic." Grayson snorted. "What about the free?" he asked. But no answer came, just silence, and the faint sound of jazz playing somewhere in the back wing. Curious, he followed it, down the service hall, past the kitchen, toward the west wing where staff quarters sat. The music got louder. Laughter. Real, unfiltered, belly-deep laughter. He paused at the open doorway. Inside, a young woman in a faded t-shirt and jeans was dancing with a mop like it owed her money. Her name tag read Isadora. Her smile was wide, her rhythm terrible, and for a moment, just one Grayson forgot about weddings, boardrooms, and betrayals. For a moment, he just watched, captivated. He didn't know it yet, but that woman, that laugh, that moment, that was the beginning of everything. The morning air inside Hale Manor was heavy with tension, the kind you couldn't see but could taste like metal on your tongue. Grayson Hale stood at the edge of the marble foyer, trying to keep his breath even, as the sound of stilettos clicked against stone behind him. His mother Celeste had arrived unannounced again, and this time she wasn't alone. Behind her trailed Harper Langford, her smile as polished as her red-lacquered nails, holding a garment bag, like a promise. Grayson Celeste said, voice like silk stretched over steel. Harper brought her engagement dress. We thought you'd want to see it. Grayson's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He hadn't agreed to anything. Not the wedding, not the announcement, and certainly not the woman whose presence always made him feel like a museum exhibit. He opened his mouth to object, but then he saw her. Down the hallway, balancing on a stepladder, one gloved hand on a chandelier, the other swiping a rag across crystal like it owed her rent. Isadora Reyes. She wore old jeans, a faded I Survived Chicago 2020 t-shirt, and had a pencil stuck in her bun, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was humming, off-key, and free. Something inside Grayson snapped clean and instant, like a rubber band stretched too far. He could feel Harper's perfume creeping toward him, could hear Celeste's voice already describing the Langford-Hale merger to a future PR team. His chest constricted like a vice, his throat dry with panic. And before logic caught up to instinct, he turned on his heel and walked straight toward Isadora. She didn't see him at first, until she looked down and saw the CEO of Hale & Co. charging toward her like a man possessed. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, startled, still perched on the ladder. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. In one smooth motion, Grayson reached up, cupped her waist with one hand, and pulled her down toward him. "What the?" she gasped, but it never finished. Because his mouth was already on hers, and not just a peck, not a soft Hollywood brush. This was a full, committed 3-second-long kiss that made the walls of Hale Manor shudder with shock. Her gloves hit the floor. Her rag landed on a priceless vase. And in the background, Celeste Hale dropped her purse. Literally. For a single impossible moment, the world froze. Harper's jaw dropped. A chandelier crystal clinked. Somewhere in the distance, a maid shrieked softly into her hands. Then, as if rewinding her own shock, Isadora shoved Grayson so hard he stumbled back 3 steps, nearly knocking into a Roman statue worth more than her entire apartment building. "What the actual hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, cheeks flaming. "Are you drunk? Did you hit your head? Who even kisses someone mid-sweep?" Grayson blinked, stunned. "I can explain," he said, even though he absolutely could not. "Oh, you better," Isadora snapped, yanking off the cloth from her hair like it was on fire. "Because you just kissed me in front of your mother, her porcelain doll, and about 4 housekeepers who are going to make this the headline of the week." Celeste was still frozen, eyes wide with horror, as if someone had just lit a bonfire in the middle of a board meeting. Grayson, Montgomery, Hale. She breathed each word a court sentence. What was that? Grayson straightened his jacket and truly tried to look like a man who had made a strategic decision rather than a spontaneous social suicide. That, he said, nodding toward Isadora, is my girlfriend. Isadora choked on her own breath. I'm sorry, what? Harper stepped forward, eyebrows arched in disbelief. You're dating the cleaning staff now. Grayson didn't blink. Yes, since when? Celeste asked, her tone acidic. Since a while, he lied. It's serious. Isadora stared at him like he'd just claimed to be the president of Mars. You've lost your mind, she hissed. This is a joke, right? Tell them it's a joke. But Grayson didn't. Because deep down, under the panic and impulse and adrenaline, something about her grounding presence, the way she refused to be intimidated even now, made this feel more real than anything he'd experienced with Harper. You kissed me, Isadora said, pacing now, furious. You kissed me like I was some kind of chess move in a billionaire soap opera. Grayson followed her. I panicked. He admitted, hands up. My mother was pushing me into an engagement I didn't agree to. You were there. I reacted. Reacted. She repeated, spinning on her heel. Reacted. You're not allergic to diamonds, Grayson. You don't get to react with my lips. She was fuming. He was guilty. And behind them, Celeste was already dialing someone, probably the PR team, probably the lawyer, maybe even the family therapist. You owe me a raise, a bonus, and possibly emotional support payments for the next decade, Isadora growled, snatching her gloves off the floor. And just so we're clear, I'm not your girlfriend. Not now. Not ever. She turned on her heel, marched toward the service hallway, and slammed the door with enough force to rattle the chandelier she had just finished cleaning. Grayson stood in the middle of the chaos, the imprint of her anger still hot in the air, the taste of mint, chapstick, and mop water on his lips, and one undeniable realization: this was no longer a game. This was a storm, and she was the lightning. Isadora stormed down the service hallway like a thundercloud, with legs, her sneakers slapping the polished floors, gloves clenched in her fists, muttering words that would have gotten her fired 3 times over if they hadn't been whispered. Behind her, the echoes of Grayson Hale's idiotic stunt replayed on loop, his lips crashing into hers, his ridiculous, "she's my girlfriend" declaration, and the stunned silence that followed like a bad joke that landed in a room full of investors. She slammed into the laundry room and kicked a mop bucket so hard it ricocheted off the wall and clattered into the dryer. I swear to God, if this man wasn't rich, he'd be institutionalized. Donna, the head housekeeper, popped her head in. Eyebrows raised, a bundle of towels in her arms. Girl, what happened? You look like you just fought a lion. Isadora yanked off her apron and pointed dramatically toward the hallway. The CEO of this place just kissed me in front of his mother and future fiancé and declared I was his girlfriend. I nearly died. Not from the kiss, from the insanity. Donna dropped the towels. He did what? Exactly, Isadora said, breathless with rage. Like I'm some kind of prop in his little billionaire circus act. Meanwhile, upstairs, Grayson Hale paced the edge of the library like a man trying to calculate the exact moment he lost his mind. He wasn't proud of what he'd done. It had been reckless, stupid, the kind of thing tabloids would salivate over. But in that split second when he saw Harper grinning behind his mother's shoulder with that damn engagement dress and the look of ownership in her eyes, Isadora had been the only real thing in the room. He didn't know why. Maybe it was her honesty, her lack of fear, the way she looked at him like he was a person, not a trophy. But he'd messed it up badly, and now he had to fix it. He found her in the back courtyard, steam practically rising from her ears, as she scrubbed a stone bench with the aggression of a woman trying to erase him from the marble. Isadora, he said carefully, keeping a good 5 feet of distance between them. She didn't look up. You don't get to use my name like that after what you did. I panicked, he said. It was a moment of desperation. Desperation. She snapped, standing up and flinging the sponge into the bucket. You're not a man on a ledge, Grayson. You're a billionaire. You don't get to panic by assaulting someone's face. It wasn't assault, he said, regretting it the second the words left his mouth. Isadora's eyes narrowed into slits. You kissed me without asking in front of people for your own benefit. That's not romantic. That's manipulative. That's using me like I'm some accessory in your rich boy rebellion. Grayson exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. You're right. I was wrong. But, she snapped. There's a but. Are you about to offer me a coupon for emotional damage? He stepped closer. I need your help. That stopped her. Excuse me. My mother now believes we're in a relationship, he explained. If I backtrack now, she'll see it as another excuse, another delay. She'll push harder for the Harper wedding, and I'll lose the tiny sliver of control I have left. So, let me guess, Isadora said, crossing her arms. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? He nodded. For 1 week, just until the Langford deal blows over. I'll pay you. She laughed, loud, sharp. Oh my God, you really are out of your mind. I'm serious, he said, voice low. 10,000, up front. Isadora blinked. For a second, just a second, her expression faltered. 10 grand could move mountains. It could pay off her mother's hospital debt. It could schedule Mateo's surgery before winter. But then her chin lifted again, steel in her spine. So what am I to you, Hale? A paid escort. A sympathy gig. You kiss me without consent, humiliate me, and now I'm supposed to cash in like I'm auditioning for The Bachelor. You're a solution, he said. A brilliant, brave woman who happens to be in the right place at the wrong time. Wow, she said flatly. You really know how to make a girl feel special. I'm sorry, he said again, and for the first time there was something raw in his voice. This wasn't fair to you, but I'm asking not as your boss, but as someone who's out of options. Help me. 1 week, and then we walk away clean. Isadora studied him. The man was a mess in a designer suit, desperate, cornered, and oddly human. She hated that she understood the look in his eyes. She hated even more that part of her wanted to say yes. Fine, she said. But I have conditions. His eyes widened. Anything. Rule 1, she said, holding up a finger. No more kissing. None. 0. If your lips come near mine again without my permission, I swear I'll pepper spray your tie. He nodded. Agreed. Rule 2, she continued. Don't boss me around. I'm not your assistant. I'm not your puppet. I'm not your quirky makeover project. Understood. And Rule 3, she leaned in, eyes blazing. If you ever, and I mean ever, try to use me again like some disposable prop, the deal's off and I walk no refund. Grayson held out his hand. Deal. She shook it firm, eyes locked with his. Welcome to hell, Mr. Haley, she said. I hope you enjoy pretending to be in love with someone who sees right through your bullshit. As she walked away, head high and fury simmering under her skin, Grayson stood there dazed, the imprint of her words echoing louder than her footsteps. 1 week. Just 1 week. What could possibly go wrong? Day 1 of the fake relationship began with a lie so big it practically left a shadow. Isadora Reyes' housekeeper by morning, girlfriend by lunchtime. She walked into the Hale garden with a clipboard in hand and a scowl on her face while Grayson stood beside the fountain in a pressed shirt and enough nervous energy to power the Chicago grid. We need to practice, he said, running a hand through his hair. Practice what? She deadpanned. Public affection. Nicknames. Your ability to lie with a straight face. He smiled, boyish and unguarded. Start by calling me honey. She blinked once. Would you prefer darling or walking tax bracket? They went through the basics, first hand-holding, shoulder touches, eye contact. Isadora mocked every step like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Honey, she said dramatically, taking his arm. Have you seen my mop? I think I left it in the closet with your humility. Grayson couldn't help it. He laughed, and it wasn't a polite chuckle. It was the kind of laugh that caught him off guard, deep and surprised, like he hadn't done it in years. Isadora paused, genuinely startled. Did you just laugh? I think so, he admitted. That was unexpected. So, is this entire circus? She muttered, but there was a smile tugging at her lips. By day 3, things had shifted. The sarcasm remained, but beneath it, something unspoken hummed like electricity. They found themselves lingering longer in doorways, holding eye contact a few seconds too long, brushing hands during rehearsals, and forgetting to pull away. During a fake coffee date in the lounge, Grayson offered her a croissant, and she tore it in half before realizing he hated pastries, but took a bite anyway. You're weird, she said. I've been called worse, he replied. And for a moment, it didn't feel fake at all. They started learning each other's rhythms without meaning to. Grayson noticed that Isadora hummed when she was deep in thought, soft random notes like her mind had a soundtrack. She noticed he always tapped his thumb twice before speaking in public, like a quiet ritual for confidence. During one rehearsal at a rooftop cafe, he wrapped his arm around her shoulder to mimic a date, and she froze, not because she was uncomfortable, but because it felt familiar. Real. "You okay?" he asked, voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Yeah," she lied, "just getting into character." That night, Grayson found himself replaying her laugh. Not the fake one she used when mocking him, but the real one, the one that came out when she told him about the time her little brother tried to cook rice in a toaster. He sat at his desk, unable to focus on spreadsheets, wondering why this woman, who'd once just been a name on the payroll, now occupied his every idle thought. Was it her honesty, her fire, or the way she refused to let him hide behind his wealth? Whatever it was unraveling something inside him, and it terrified him. Meanwhile, Isadora was fighting a battle of her own. She had promised herself this was just a job, 1 week, one paycheck, one elaborate lie. But every time Grayson looked at her with those storm blue eyes and let his guard down, her resolve wavered. She'd known charming men before, men who said the right things and vanished the next morning, but Grayson didn't feel like those men. He felt unfinished, like someone still figuring out who he was, and that vulnerability made her chest ache in ways she couldn't afford. On day 5, during a photo shoot to create couple moments for Celeste's social media spies, Grayson pulled Isadora close in the greenhouse. "Put your hand on my chest," he whispered, "like you're in love with me." She rolled her eyes but obeyed, her fingers grazing the fabric of his shirt, resting just above his heart. She didn't expect to feel it, his heart beat fast and unsteady. "You're nervous," she murmured, surprised. "You're not," he asked, their faces inches apart. "I've been pretending all week," she said. "But this part doesn't feel like acting." Neither of them moved. The photographer cleared his throat. They broke apart, flushed and wide-eyed, the moment stretching behind them like a thread pulled too tight. Later, as they walked back to the house in silence, Grayson glanced sideways. What if we're getting too good at pretending? Isadora stopped walking. "Maybe we are," she said quietly. "But the money's still real, and so is the line between us." "What line?" he asked. "The one I draw to protect myself," she answered, then kept walking, her footsteps echoing louder than before. That evening, Grayson brought her a plate of food during a fake dinner prep. "I noticed you skipped lunch," he said. "I was busy working," she replied. "So I thought I'd help," he said. "That's not part of the agreement," she warned. "No," he said. "That's just me not being a complete jerk for once." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw the man beneath the suit, the boy who'd once dreamed of building something real before the world told him what he should become. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't get used to it," he replied, but his smile gave him away. That night in her small room at the back of the mansion, Isadora sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling, heart full of contradictions. She wasn't supposed to care. This wasn't supposed to mean anything. But somewhere between the sarcastic rehearsals and the soft gestures, she'd started wanting to believe the fantasy. Outside, Grayson stood on his balcony, watching the city lights, wondering why he felt more seen in 7 days with her than in years of polished partnerships. 1 week, he thought. Just 1 week. So why did it already feel like it wasn't going to be enough? The chandelier above the Hale dining room sparkled like a crown of fireflies caught in crystal, its light too perfect, too sterile, like everything else in the room. Isadora stood at the top of the staircase, wearing a borrowed black dress, a pair of heels half a size too big, and a poker face she'd spent all afternoon practicing in the mirror because tonight she wasn't a cleaner. She was Grayson Hale's girlfriend, and she was about to walk into the lion's den of Chicago's elite with nothing but sarcasm and grit to protect her. Grayson appeared at the base of the stairs like a movie scene come to life. Charcoal suit, open collar, expression unreadable. But when he saw her, something in his jaw unclenched, and he offered her his arm like she belonged. Like this wasn't a performance for his mother and her carefully curated circle of social assassins, and even though her palms were sweating, Isadora took it chin high, spine straight, every inch of her whispering, "You can't break me." They entered the dining room to the polite sound of forks pausing on porcelain to eyes that assessed her dress, her earrings, her laugh, dissecting her presence like a science experiment they hadn't approved. Celeste Hale stood at the head of the table, flawless in emerald silk, her expression calm as glass, but her eyes were knives wrapped in diamonds, and next to her sat Harper Langford, the embodiment of legacy, smiling the way predators smile before a kill. "So this is the girlfriend," Harper said sweetly, sipping wine with fingers manicured to perfection. "How refreshing," and Celeste chimed in with a tone dipped in honey and ice. "Tell us, Isadora, where did you and Grayson meet?" "Charity, gala, Paris trip." Isadora smiled, teeth white and sharp. "Actually, we met over a mop he knocked over a vase. I cleaned it up and he fell madly in love while I was wearing rubber gloves, and for a second the entire table blinked, unsure whether to laugh or gasp." "How quaint," said one of the older women, dabbing at her lips with a napkin. "And what do you do, darling?" Isadora didn't flinch. "I work at Hale Manor. I clean. I scrub toilets, sweep floors, and occasionally get mistaken for the help while attending dinners like this." And next to her, Grayson choked slightly on his drink, clearly unprepared for how effortlessly she flipped the script, while Celeste's smile stretched thinner than the linen napkins. "You're very honest," Celeste finally said, voice low and precise, like a scalpel about to cut. "But Grayson is a man of status, of legacy. You must understand the kind of life that comes with his name." Isadora leaned forward, elbows on the table like a deliberate rebellion. "I understand more than you think. I come from a place where dinner means instant noodles and family means surviving together. If legacy means polished lies, I'll take struggle and truth every time." The room fell into a stunned silence, only broken by the quiet clink of a fork being set down by one of the stunned Langford cousins, and Grayson, who had spent his entire life mastering boardrooms and dodging emotion, looked at Isadora like she had just punched a hole in the sky and let light pour through, because in this world of carefully rehearsed smiles, she was a hurricane of reality, and he was starting to crave the storm. Harper crossed one leg over the other, cool as ice. "Well, I suppose we all play roles, don't we?" she said, eyes locked on Isadora's. "Some of us are born for the part, and some audition." Isadora's lips curved, not in mockery, but in something quieter, sharper. "And some of us rewrite the script," she said, "because life didn't give us a stage. It gave us a floor to mop and a reason to fight." And even Celeste looked momentarily disarmed, as if she hadn't prepared for someone to speak without fear. Dessert arrived, lavender panna cotta in crystal dishes no one was truly hungry for, and Grayson took Isadora's hand under the table, subtle and brief. But his thumb brushed hers with the gentleness of something real, and she didn't pull away because despite the tension and the underhanded barbs, despite the cold stares and the weight of legacy pressing down like a stone wall, for a moment she felt powerful, not because she was pretending, but because she was unapologetically herself. Later that night, as Grayson walked her back to her quarters, he stopped just before the door, hands in his pockets, like a boy, unsure how to say what mattered. "You didn't just survive in there," he said softly. "You burned that room down." And Isadora laughed, the sound light and free. "They underestimated me," she said. "Let's keep it that way." And as he watched her disappear behind the door, Grayson realized something terrifyingly simple. This wasn't just about outsmarting his mother anymore. This was about a woman who challenged his world and made it feel worth defending. Harper Langford never lost with grace. She studied elegance like a science. But beneath the pearls and posture lived a wolf in silk. And the night after that humiliating dinner, she stood in her penthouse suite overlooking Michigan Avenue, swirling Merlot in a crystal glass. Her eyes dark with calculation as she watched Isadora's face flash across gossip blogs under headlines like "Hale Hare's New Flame Love" or "Cover Up," and smiled because now the game had shifted and it was time to remind the world who really belonged in Grayson Hale's future. She didn't need to destroy Isadora, just taint her just enough to make Celeste recoil, to make the board whisper, to make Grayson doubt. She knew men like him bred on trust funds and power, but raised with just enough insecurity to fear that love without pedigree might turn to betrayal. And so she made the call to a tabloid photographer with a talent for dirty work and a weakness for cash. "I need pictures," she said sweetly. "Intimate ones. Candid ones. Make it look scandalous. Make it look true." And when he asked who the target was, she simply said, "The girl who doesn't belong." The next morning, Isadora had no idea she was being followed. She was too busy juggling breakfast trays and dodging Celeste's icy glares to notice the camera clicks from a black SUV across the street. When she took her break at a downtown cafe and hugged her childhood friend Matteo, a tattooed mechanic with a smile too wide for polite society, the camera caught the moment he kissed her cheek, and later when he jokingly took her hand to mimic a proposal, the shutter snapped again, slicing truth into something unrecognizable. By sunset, Harper had the photos in hand, grainy but damning. Isadora leaning close to a man in a leather jacket, laughing, touching his arm, his mouth near her ear. To anyone who didn't know better, it screamed secret lover. And Harper forwarded them to Celeste with the subject line, "Thought you should see this before it gets to the press." And then leaned back in her chair, satisfied because she didn't need to say a word. Celeste would handle the rest like a true matriarch of manipulation. When the photos reached Grayson's inbox 2 hours later, his first reaction was disbelief, then confusion, then something colder. Doubt, the kind that seeps in through cracks you didn't know were there. He stared at the images for a full minute, jaw tight, chest burning. And when his mother knocked and entered without waiting, her expression already solemn, he didn't even argue. Just held up the screen and said, "What is this?" And Celeste, with the performance of a woman who had raised a dynasty, sighed and said, "I warned you, son, people like her come from chaos." "That's Matteo," Isadora said when Grayson confronted her that evening, voice sharp with confusion. "He's like my brother. We grew up together." But Grayson's face was unreadable, stiff, distant, like he'd put up a wall she couldn't climb. "Why didn't you tell me you were meeting someone?" he asked, and she blinked, stunned. "Because I didn't know I had to ask permission to see a friend." And when he didn't respond, when he just looked down, like the pictures were proof enough, her voice cracked. "You think I'd do this to you for what, $10,000? I don't know what to think," Grayson admitted, and the words shattered her. Because in that instant she realized it wasn't the lie that hurt. It was that after everything, after all the sparks and soft touches and real moments, he still didn't trust her. Not fully, not when it counted. And she stepped back like he'd struck her. "You know what hurts most," she said. "Not that someone tried to destroy me, but that you let them." And before he could speak, before he could reach for her, she was already walking away. Later that night, Isadora sat on the curb outside her apartment building, the cool air biting at her skin, phone clutched in her hand, as she stared at the photo Harper had leaked to the tabloids. It had already gone viral, and the caption beneath it read, "CEO's MAID caught cheating affair with street mechanic exposed." She laughed hollow and bitter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like the version of herself she'd fought to outgrow the girl nobody defended. Meanwhile, Grayson stood alone in his office, the city skyline mocking him through the glass, the weight of his doubt settling on his shoulders like cement, because deep down he knew Isadora didn't lie. Her eyes had burned with betrayal, not guilt, but years of being trained to see risk before loyalty had made him slow to believe. And now she was gone, and the silence she left behind felt sharper than anything his mother or Harper could have engineered. In the darkness, Harper toasted herself with another glass of wine, watching the chaos unfold across social media, confident that by morning, Isadora Reyes would be out of the picture, and Grayson would be back where he belonged beside her, in a world where power trumped emotion, and truth was just another tool to manipulate. But what she didn't see coming was the fire she'd just lit inside the wrong woman, a woman who'd faced worse than betrayal and come out swinging, and that fire, when it returned, would burn down everything Harper built. The rain fell like punishment cold, steady, merciless, drumming against the windows of the Hale estate, as if the sky itself had turned on them. And in the hallway, just outside Grayson's study, Isadora stood still, one hand clutching the edge of the doorframe, the other holding the folded tabloid article he hadn't even bothered to hide. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths, each one more painful than the last, and she hated that she still hoped he'd say something, anything to fix it. Grayson sat behind his desk, elbows on the wood face buried in his hands like a man unraveling. But when he finally looked up, his eyes were tired, not from work, not from the press, but from something deeper, heavier, and far more human. Isadora, he began, voice raw. I didn't want to believe it, and those 7 words hit her harder than the article, harder than the photo, because wanting to believe was never the same as choosing to. You didn't trust me, she said, voice trembling but clear, like the surface of a lake just before the storm hits. Not for a second. Not when it mattered and he stood reaching for her, like that would erase the silence, the doubt, the damage. But she stepped back, the space between them now. A canyon made of everything he never said when she needed him to. I wanted to, he insisted. I was angry. I was caught off guard. You were raised to expect betrayal, she interrupted, and I was foolish enough to think I could be different. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the rain thrumming harder, and then she pulled something from her coat pocket, a tiny silver key on a ribbon, the one to his private suite, the one he'd given her the night she told him about Mateo, and he'd whispered, "You're safe here, always." She held it out, palm flat, no tremble now, just finality, and when he didn't take it, she laid it gently on his desk, right next to the article, as if both were proof that what they had, whatever it was over. I should have walked away the moment this started, she said, not bitter, just broken. But I let myself believe in you, Grayson. Not the CEO, not the man in suits and headlines, but the guy who brought me soup when I was sick, who remembered my brother's name, who laughed like he forgot the world was watching. And his throat closed at the sound of her voice cracking on that last word, because now she was watching, and what she saw in him wasn't love. It was disappointment. Don't go, he said, stepping forward again, but she shook her head, hair damp at the edges from the storm outside, face glistening with a mixture of rain and something far more human. It's not about leaving, she whispered. It's about knowing when you're no longer wanted, not for show, not for saving, but for who you really are. And her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, knuckles white as if the weight of letting go might keep her from falling apart. Grayson didn't chase her not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to fight for someone who had already been forced to fight her whole life. He watched as she turned heels, clicking softly down the hallway, the sound fading with every step, like the closing of a door he'd never reopen, and in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't losing a fake girlfriend or an escape plan from Harper or even a PR shield. He was losing the only real thing in his carefully constructed life. Outside, Isadora didn't cry, not at first. She walked down the long stone steps of Hale Manor with her head held high, her dress clinging to her legs in the rain, her heart unraveling with each step. But by the time she reached the bus stop, 2 blocks down, alone and drenched and invisible again, her shoulders shook with the sobs she'd refused to let him see. And when she finally sat, she buried her face in her hands, whispering Mateo's name like a prayer, like an anchor, like a reason not to go back. Inside the estate, Grayson stood by the window watching the rain wash away her footprints, her scent, her voice from the hallway walls. And when Celeste entered behind him with a smug tilt to her head and the words, "It's for the best." On her lips, he turned slowly, eyes like ice, and said, "Get out." Because for once the empire she built meant nothing to him, compared to the girl who just walked away because he hadn't fought hard enough. That night the house was silent. No music from the West Wing, no laughter bouncing off the marble, just the haunting echo of what-ifs. Grayson sat on the edge of his bed, the key still in his palm, digging into his skin like a reminder that some mistakes don't make noise. They just leave quietly in the middle of the rain and take your heart with them. And across the city, Isadora lay in her tiny room, clutching Mateo's photo to her chest, whispering to the ceiling. I was enough. I know I was, and hoping somewhere deep down that one day he might believe it too. Grayson Hale sat in the dark of his office, the city lights outside like tiny mocking stars, and in his hands was the same photograph he had stared at 100 times, Isadora laughing beside a man with his arm around her. But now, in the silence after her absence, the image didn't strike anger, only unease. Because something about it felt wrong, not just morally, but technically like a puzzle piece forced into place with a hammer instead of a fit. He stormed into the security room at Hale Manor, startling James, his assistant, who was sipping coffee and watching stock tickers. Pull surveillance from the West Gate and the street camera across Grandview Cafe 2 days ago, 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Grayson barked and James blinked, nodded, and got to work without asking why. Grayson stood behind him, arms crossed, heart pounding, praying for something, anything that might undo the worst mistake he'd ever made. And there it was. On screen at 1:48 p.m., a black SUV rolled to a discreet stop across from the cafe where Isadora sat. A man stepped out with a long-lens camera, crouched behind the SUV's open door, and began clicking frantically in her direction. Grayson leaned in, heart sinking deeper, as he watched a scene he hadn't questioned enough unfold from a new perspective. This wasn't discovery. It was ambush. That night he called Marcus, the man in the photo, and after a pause long enough to break bone, Marcus sighed and said, "She didn't even know. Harper paid me to pose. I thought it was just a power move. I didn't know it would end her." Grayson sank into his chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. Every detail he had ignored now screamed for attention. He hadn't just doubted Isadora, he'd been complicit in her humiliation. Fueled by something between guilt and fury, Grayson tore through every digital file Harper had ever sent him. And there, buried in an old forwarded email to his mother, was the dagger subject line. "This should fix your little problem," with raw image files attached, and the same timestamps as the manipulated photos that had shattered everything. He stared at the words until they blurred. They hadn't just planned this. They'd counted on him to be too proud to question it. He returned to the apartment complex where Isadora used to live, knocked on the door until his knuckles bled, only for a neighbor to answer and say she'd moved out. "Left no forwarding address," the woman said. But she seemed heartbroken. On the mailbox was a note Isadora had taped with a faded photo of her family and one handwritten line. "Trust is something I fight for. I wish he had." Grayson dropped to the curb, hands trembling, eyes stinging not from the wind, but from the weight of what he had broken. That night he sat at his desk for hours, drafting apologies, deleting them, writing again because nothing sounded right. No sentence could undo the fact that he had chosen suspicion over love. Eventually he wrote by hand, line after line, ink smudged with sweat and sorrow. "You gave me a kind of love I didn't believe I deserved. And I repaid you with silence, with doubt. If you never read this, I understand. But if there's a chance left, even a small one, I'm ready to fight. Not for a cover story. For you." The next morning, Grayson called an emergency board meeting. He stood in the middle of the executive floor, surrounded by corporate sharks and PR strategists, his mother seated at the far end like a judge. He played the call with Marcus, showed metadata from the original images, revealed the source of Harper's email. No spin, no damage control, just the raw, awful truth. "This wasn't a mistake," he said, voice steady. "This was a betrayal orchestrated by people I trusted, and I let it destroy the only honest thing in my life." Harper tried to explain, but her voice sounded distant, irrelevant. Celeste said nothing, her gaze sharp but shaken, as if seeing her son clearly for the first time. Grayson turned to them both. "I've played by your rules long enough," he said. "I won't build my future on fear and manipulation. If choosing her costs me everything, I'll rebuild it from the ground up with integrity or not at all." And with that he left, letting silence be the final sentence. That night he stood outside a small garage on the south side where Matteo, Isadora's brother, worked late. The younger man looked up warily, wrench still in hand. Grayson didn't make a speech, just pulled out the envelope with the letter inside and held it out. "If she still cares," he said softly, "tell her I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm proving I'm worth it." Then he walked away into the cold Chicago wind. No longer the man everyone expected him to be, but one willing to become the man she deserved. One step, one truth at a time. The boardroom's ambiance was colder than Arctic steel glass walls, a polished mahogany table, and seats filled with faces shaped by ambition. And there stood Grayson Hale, at the head collar, unbuttoned sleeves rolled trembling with quiet purpose. Beneath the surface of corporate calm, his heart thudded like war drums, Because tonight he wasn't there to negotiate deals or defend the family empire. He was there to summon the courage to lay everything on the line for something he had long feared was gone forever. He cleared his throat softly and spoke. Before any quarterly report, before any decision about the future of Hale & Co. I need to speak entirely from my heart, even if that truth costs me my legacy. The hush that followed was immediate, a vacuum of breath and expectation. Celeste Hale, seated like a marble queen in emerald silk, raised a single brow and leaned forward, the only sensible reaction to a son who had dared speak like that, and the rest of the room shifted in their seats, sensing they were waiting for a different kind of address. Without a word, Grayson pressed play on the projector. The screen flickered to life, showing the call from Marcus Webb, the embedded metadata from the original paparazzi shots, the forwarding email from Harper titled, "This solves our problem," and finally a photograph of Isadora alone in the rain outside the Manor, suitcase in hand, shoulders squared with resignation. A single frame of defeat that sank into the silence of the room like a cannonball into still water. He turned to face them, voice surprisingly steady. "You assumed she wasn't worthy, because she cleaned floors, because she spoke truths you didn't want to hear, because she came from a world you dismissed." He paused, letting the accusation hang before continuing. "But the only thing she ever asked from me was honesty. I gave her doubt. I chose fear over faith, and now I stand here facing you confessing that my worst mistake was choosing silence instead of trust." Harper shifted. Her perfect posture cracked just enough to reveal raw impatience or perhaps the bitterness of exposure. Celeste stared at her son, expression inscrutable, until she finally whispered, "You would sacrifice everything for a girl who walked away from you." Grayson laughed then, not in jest, but in helpless disbelief, voice heavy with sorrow. "No, Mother. I would do it because I chased her away. I didn't chase her home when she mattered most." Then he reached into his pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. The room held its breath. He held it aloft like a banner. "I bought this before I had reason to believe my world could crumble before betrayal and doubt tore us apart. I meant to give it to her when I thought I had everything. Now I give it to all of you to show you this wasn't a calculated move, it was a confession. I love her. I have loved her beyond reason, beyond security." In an act no one saw coming, Grayson lowered himself to one knee right in the center of the executive table. The box remained unopened, resting upon his palm as he addressed empty air as though Isadora herself stood before him. "Isadora Reyes. If you're listening, you were the one real thing in this house ever since that first night you said you'd rather scrub toilets than dissemble with compliments. I was weak when I needed to be strong. I doubted the only person who never lied to me." The sting in his words echoed off the walls. He stood abruptly and placed the ring gently atop his polished nameplate. "This isn't a negotiation or a family transaction. I don't expect your approval, Celeste. I don't expect your blessing, Harper. I offer this because I finally understand what matters." The atmosphere shifted, executives exchanged awkward glances, the PR crisis strategists fidgeted, and even Celeste lowered her gaze, as if seeing not the heir to Hale & Company, but a son who had finally chosen love over duty. Grayson turned and took a slow breath. "If choosing her costs me everything, status, inheritance, reputation, I will build something new from the ashes. Better. More honest. But I refuse to live a life where I silence the person who reminds me how to feel." He walked away from the head of the table, shoulders straight but soul lighter, because for once, prestige felt meaningless compared to what he refused to lose. That night, he walked alone through the chilled streets of Chicago, past gleaming towers and hum of traffic, carrying only that closed velvet box and a battered photograph of Isadora. A Chicago winter wind bit at his cheeks, but he felt only heat, a vow burning in his chest to find her, to tell her he wasn't perfect, but that he was hers if she chose to come back. He didn't know if she would, or if she still believed in him. But each step beneath amber streetlights was an admission that sometimes love demands risk, and sometimes salvation comes in the shape of a broken man who dared to fall on his knees at the boardroom table for hope, not for power. A gentle breeze swept across the lawn by Lake Michigan, lifting the soft hem of Isadora's simple white cotton dress, like an invitation to honesty and at the front of the courtyard stood Grayson Hale, tie loose and sleeves rolled, his eyes locked on the assemblage of guests that blended high society elites and former support staff in a single mosaic of reconciliation. Because today wasn't about power, it was about choosing love boldly in full view and showing that what lasts isn't wealth or status, but truth and vulnerability made public. At the far end of the lawn, Isadora walked slowly down the aisle beside her brother Nico, her face serene, but her heart pounding, as if it carried every word he had never said. And when she reached the front and lifted her gaze to Grayson, time seemed to still. The lawn went quiet. The water's edge shimmered softly, and for just a moment, the world held its breath, recognizing that this simple woman and this once guarded man had torn down walls. And now here they were, meeting again on common ground. Grayson swallowed hard, voice thick as he spoke into the stillness. When I stood behind corporate walls or family demands, I lost sight of what mattered most. That what you gave me wasn't performance, but raw truth, even in your pain, because you never compromised who you were. I failed you by believing that love required perfection, not integrity. Today, I stand before everyone here to say that I choose integrity, and I choose you not for convenience, but for courage. Isadora's eyes softened, tears glistening as she replied, I walked away because I loved him too much to stay for lies that felt safer. I believed I wasn't enough, not for this world, not for his expectations. But today, you are showing me otherwise. She paused, taking a breath, anchored in both fear and hope. And so I choose you too, because you gave me back what I always deserved, vision of my worth in full light, without apology. Then in a moment unscripted, Grayson knelt before her again, not as a formality, but as longing made action, and placed the ring he had held in silence for months on top of the altar table between them, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant band that spoke of commitment, born from truth, not display. In front of these people he declared softly, I vow not to rescue you or reshape you, but to walk beside you, building a future built on honesty, respect, and the defiance of expectations. She offered her hand, trembling but determined, and said with unwavering strength, Yes. Then before anyone else could breathe, the officiant. A friend Grayson met at a charity recital, smiled broadly and spoke, By the courage you've both shown, and by the love that grew from truth, I now pronounce you husband and wife. And the hush cracked into applause, not forced, but wholehearted, as if everyone in attendance understood they had witnessed love's revival, not just romance's fulfillment. The kiss that followed wasn't designed for show. It was quiet, full of trembling promise and relief, sealing not just a wedding vow, but redemption for both. The guests cheered softly and then fell silent again, letting the moment settle. This wasn't about grand gestures. It was about a man learning to honor a woman's worth, and a woman daring to trust a man who'd once let her slip away. After the ceremony, the reception began beneath softly strung lights. Iced lemonade replaced champagne. Lemon sugar cookies instead of caviar, and laughter replaced small talk as former cleaning staff and executives danced cheek to cheek to a jazzy Latin tune. Celeste Hale, seated beside Carmen Gonzalez, whispered old family recipes. Others shared stories about boardroom turns, alongside dishwasher stories, proving that when humanity returns, hierarchy fades. Later, under the canopy of lantern light, Grayson pulled Isadora onto a small wooden platform for a dance. As the strain of a slow waltz began, she rested her head near his shoulder. Softly, she said, You didn't have to fix me. His hand brushed her hair gently. All I needed was to learn how to believe in you, he answered, voice tender. They moved together, her cotton dress flowing, his suit constraints loosened in a dance built on mutual recognition, forgiveness, and the quiet possibility of forever. At the edge of the reception lawn overlooking the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, shimmering with distant lights, Grayson stood with his mother and said quietly, I don't know what comes next. There are still deals, still expectations, still eyes watching. Celeste looked at her son, then at Isadora standing a few steps away, radiant in truth, and realized the man she thought she'd raised was gone, and what remained was someone brave enough to choose love over convenience. She found her voice softly. "Thank you." Grayson then crossed the lawn, barefoot, hand outstretched to Isadora. She took it, and as they walked together into the night surrounded by people who mattered, he finally felt whole again, knowing that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't a family name. It's the choice to fight for love, no matter the cost. The morning after the wedding was quiet but not peaceful. Grayson awoke early to the sound of incoming notifications vibrating on his nightstand, headlines flashing across his locked screen. CEO marries MAID, hail family legacy in turmoil. He rubbed his face, the weight of decision still sitting on his chest like a stone. But when he turned and saw Isadora sleeping beside him, her hand resting over his heart like it belonged there, he exhaled slowly because some battles were worth the war. Downstairs, the staff was buzzing with activity. Press vans loitered outside the gates. Drones hovered at a respectful distance, and inside the estate, Celeste sat at the kitchen table in full makeup, flipping through a printed dossier, sipping black tea with the elegance of a woman who'd survived worse storms, but never quite this kind of rebellion. When Grayson walked in, collar open, jaw unshaven, she didn't look up, only said, "The board is asking questions. If you want to keep your seat, you'll have to answer them." Across town, Harper Langford was in her father's study pacing as she read aloud the list of investors pulling back post-announcement. "They're calling it emotional instability," she snapped, clutching her phone like it might snap in half. "You said he would never actually do this, that he'd flinch at the finish line. Well, he didn't flinch. He jumped, and her father merely adjusted his cufflinks and said, 'Then we push back harder because losing Grayson wasn't just a blow. It was betrayal wrapped in bad press.'" At Hale & Co. The first board meeting post-wedding was tense, half the room whispering about PR disaster, the other half staring at Isadora like she was an exhibit behind glass. She walked in behind Grayson, chin high, dressed in sleek navy, her only accessory, a silver pen tucked into her notebook. No makeup, no diamonds, just presence. And when Grayson stood before them and said, "This is my wife, and she will have a voice in everything we do, moving forward," there was silence, and then questions, dozens of them. None fair, but all expected. Will she be influencing mergers? Is she part of the Sterling rejection? Can we expect further restructuring based on your marriage? The room erupted, and Grayson listened, nodded. But when Isadora leaned forward and said, "I may not have sat in your towers, but I've cleaned them. I know the corners. You never look in the lives this company steps over. I'm not here to play politics. I'm here because I married the man who promised to change it." The room went cold, but one voice at the back muttered, "About time," and the mood shifted. But the celebration was short-lived that evening. Montgomery Tech's largest vendor terminated a 7-year contract, citing instability. And within hours, Blake Investment froze future funding. The media spun it into chaos, and even James, the most loyal of assistants, asked, "Do we have a plan for if this entire empire crumbles?" Grayson didn't flinch. "We do," he said. "We rebuild from what's true," and Isadora simply nodded, took his hand and said, "We don't need to win headlines, we need to survive long enough to change the story." That weekend they visited the South Side, Isadora's old neighborhood, bringing news of Hale & Coney, his initiative to hire from within the communities they'd ignored for years. At first, no one believed them, but when Grayson rolled up his sleeves and joined Mateo in hauling crates at a community food drive, cameras forgotten, sweat, pouring laughter, genuine people started listening, and one woman even whispered, "If this is what love made him do, maybe we should believe in love again." Back at the mansion, Celeste watched clips from the event with a glass of white wine alone in the drawing room, and for the first time in years, she didn't see a boy playing at CEO. She saw a man standing in the storm, not for power, but for purpose. And when Carmen Gonzalez stopped by with a pie and a peace offering, Celeste invited her in not for manners, but maybe just maybe to understand the kind of strength it took to raise a daughter like Isadora. Yet not all was calm. Late that night, Grayson received a letter marked private. It was from Victor Hedge offering him a buyout of his Hale stock at 50 cents on the dollar, cloaked as a mercy deal to help you offload the distraction of romance. Grayson stared at the letter, then tore it in half because nothing about loving Isadora was distraction. It was the most focused, clearest act of his entire life. And if the world couldn't see that it wasn't his job to prove it, it was his job to live it. And as the week closed with quiet victories, a reinstated supplier. Here, a favorable article there, Grayson and Isadora sat on the rooftop of their home, the skyline stretching wide, and he turned to her, brushing a curl behind her ear, saying, "They thought they could break us." She smiled softly, leaned in, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "They never understood that we weren't built to break. We were built to bend, to rise, and to become more." And somewhere below, in the heartbeat of the city, their love pulsed like a promise still unfolding. Spring light floods through the glass facade of Hale & Co., illuminating the polished lobby where Grayson Hale and Isadora stride side by side, their fingers intertwined like seams holding worlds together. And every nameplate that once belonged to faceless employees now bears stories they once scrubbed floors. Now they lead projects, and in their walk echoes a simple truth. Legacy is not built in isolation, but with hands that reach across differences and hearts that choose love over power. Upstairs in the boardroom's great portrait gallery hangs the charcoal portrait commissioned by Grayson himself, him and Isadora standing in thoughtful silence, framed by portraits of employees in their uniforms, some holding tools, others clenching notebooks. Celeste Hale stands before it silent yet transfixed, because she sees not scandal in that image, but a living testament that her son became the man who broke tradition to accept truth, and that change, real and enduring, often starts with the courage to love someone unstoppable. Across town at the Hale and Gonzalez Community Center, a summer evening hums with energy, local teens filling out scholarship applications, former custodians mentoring young engineers, laughter rising with jazz and salsa melodies from the band. On the raised dais, Grayson offers a speech brimming with gratitude but grounded in purpose. This isn't about another corporate expansion. It's about choosing people who've always mattered but were never seen. He looks at Isadora, whose presence there is no longer symbolic but essential, because she taught him that leadership is best when it's shared. Afterward, they dance beneath string lights with former support staff and executives alike, her head resting gently on his shoulder. When he tilts her chin up, he whispers to her, "We built this from what felt impossible." She smiles with quiet conviction. Then let's keep dancing even when the music changes. The movement of their bodies echoes long-fought reconciliation. In that moment, neither love nor leadership feels fragile. They feel inevitable, a testament to hope made real. Later that night, by the lake under a summer moon, they sit on a simple bench far from mansion grandeur. Ava now 2 toddles barefoot through daisies nearby, her laughter mingling with the water's ripple. Grayson balances their daughter gently in his lap. Isadora leans into him. "We didn't choose ease," she says softly. "We chose each other." He breathes her name in affirmation and a vow. And now we choose to pass that courage forward. A few days later at a National Tech Expo, Grayson presents a new initiative, Real Growth for Real People. On stage, he introduces recipients of grants, talented applicants from underserved communities, including former Hale employees. Isadora joins him to accept applause when their names are called. A camera catches him reaching across quietly to tuck a stray hair behind her ear. It's intimate, not staged, proof that their partnership is rooted in respect, not spectacle. Back home, evenings are simple rituals. He seasons chicken while she chops vegetables. Ava plays on the kitchen floor, scribbling on scrap paper. The aroma of garlic and lemon drifts in from the grill. They sit at a modest outdoor table, drink wine cooled by summer breeze, and talk not about markets or mergers, but about the woman Ava will grow up as, curious, brave kind. Grayson looks at Isadora and says, "You gave me more than a wife." She responds, eyes warm and steady. "We gave each other purpose." But the world beyond their garden doesn't always soften. Victoria Langford relaunches a competing initiative backed by anonymous investors. Whispers re-emerge accusing Hale & Co. of favoritism. Financial press questions Grayson's leadership. Instead of hiding, he presses forward, agreeing to an open quanda. When asked if Isadora's involvement is due to romance, he smiles. I chose her to remind our company and our board that integrity matters more than convenience. If that's nepotism, then I'd like more people like her in every boardroom. Meanwhile, Celeste gives a candid interview. I once defined legacy as preserving status. I was wrong. Legacy isn't gates that keep people out. Legacy is doors that invite others in. My son and his wife taught me that. The article becomes widely shared, not scandalous, but inspiring. It reframes not just their story, but what people imagine success looks like. Romance and redemption, intertwined in public revelation, become their quiet revolution. On the anniversary of their wedding, they host a dinner by Lake Michigan, where former cleaning staff and executives dine at the same long table string, lights overhead, gentle music playing. Grayson stands, raises his glass. To love that risks everything for truth. Isadora smiles, tipping her glass. And to legacy made brave by choosing people over protocol. She locks her gaze with yours. The audience. What legacy would you choose if love was worth the risk? The toast ends in applause, laughter, tears, and as the lanterns flicker above the lake, their future lies open, unfolding, and they invite you to write the next page too.